Okay, can you hear us now? Oh no, he's muted,
He's
but
muted himself.
yeah, we're gonna see if we can unmute ourselves.
Okay.
I think it's working.
Good evening. Yes, I hear you, but
Okay,
there's
awesome.
no picture.
We haven't got any pictures on the screen yet, Russ. Thank you. I'm glad you can hear us. And we're working with one of our consultants to make sure he has the picture.
Why isn't? I can do that.
But Zoom would. Zoom.
It wants to send it like a Gmail. Yeah. I paused the recording until we can get him in.
Thank you. I don't know why it would be Okay, I call this meeting to order at 6:09 p.m. Commissioner Rogers, would you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Commissioner Lothar?
Here.
Commissioner Truxillo?
Here.
Commissioner Lynn?
Here.
Commissioner Leach?
Here.
Commissioner Gaitis?
Here.
Vice Chair Bakta?
Here.
And Chair Lowe?
Here.
Thank you.
Item number 4, public comment. Notice to the public. Time is set aside to receive public comment on matters not calendared on the agenda. Recognized by the chair, it is requested that you please state your name and address for the record. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Under California law, the planning commission is prohibited from generally discussing or taking action on items not included in the agenda. However, the planning commission may briefly respond to comments or questions from members of the public. Therefore, the planning commission will listen to all public comments, but will not generally discuss the matter of action on it. Is anyone here tonight to speak publicly on the item not on the agenda? Seeing no one, close the public comment. Item 5, public hearing. Item A, consideration of an environmental impact report for the downtown Bishop plan, mixed use zoning overlay. Consideration of adoption of the downtown plan and the mixed use zoning overlay consideration ordinance, adding chapter 46, mixed use overlay downtown overlay zone, title 17, zoning, adding chapter 47, mixed use overlay transition overlay zone, title 17, zoning, amending section 17.8.24 definitions of motel or hotel, and amending commercial parking standards provided in sections 17.48.070, subsection A, 17.52.074, section A, and 17.56.080, section A of the Bishop Municipal Code. So I'd like to open the public hearing on this item. Mr. Pollack, your review of the staff.
Good evening, commissioners. It's a pleasure to see you this evening. I want to thank you for your patience through technical difficulties getting to this item. I'm excited to bring this item to you tonight. As you know, we've worked to develop downtown specific planning mixed-use overlay for several years, including the environmental impact report, which is a document we've been waiting on to facilitate a consideration by your commission to recommend adoption to the council. I'm going to start this evening just with expressing my appreciation for this team effort. We had excellent consultants who put together the plan and put together the environmental documents. They were wonderful team members to city staff. I also want to express my appreciation to the community for turning out and building the foundation and providing the input and the feedback that is really the backbone of this document. Certainly want to express my appreciation to your commission for being engaged in this process, providing feedback on the document throughout it, and of course taking time of your Thanksgiving weekend to be familiar with this rather week. Yeah, appreciate that. With that, we're going to receive a presentation that provides an overview of the specific plan from Tim Bevins, who's the project manager with Alta Planning and Design. Following his presentation with an overview of the plan and mixed use overlay, we'll receive a presentation from Mr. Robert Ederson, who's joined us here in the evening. He's with Helix Environmental, and they prepared the environmental impact report and provide an overview. Not so much on all of the review that was done in the document, but really the importance of it and its relationship to the specific plan. And then I will look forward to describing the mechanics of the adoption and look forward to your consideration. So with that, if you don't have any initial questions for me, I'd love to turn it over to Evans with Alta to provide an overview of the plan.
Thank you, Elaine, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us. As Elaine mentioned, I will be providing an overview of the plan and its development. We've certainly gotten into the specifics in prior sessions, but I want to provide a holistic, big picture look at the specific plan and mixed use overlay. So by way of introduction, I am both an urban designer and an urban planner by training, and I wear both hats at Alta, where we focus on work like this. So it's been an excellent project to date, and I want to just reiterate what Elaine just mentioned, that we got very good and actionable public input throughout the development of this plan from concept through final, which is rare and very much appreciated. So this is a community-informed plan, to say the least. So with that, if we can advance to the next slide, please. Great. So this is the vision for the plan. And I'll refrain from reading everything that's on the slides, but I think that this one in particular is important to read out loud. So the plan, the specific plan, and the mixed use overlay establish a framework for creating a vibrant, authentic, and pedestrian-friendly downtown Bishop that expands housing capacity and improves its standing as a destination for residents and tourists alike. I think that says it all. And this is something that was, refined and workshopped with public input. We heard multiple times the importance of striking a balance, of recognizing that there's need for growth or increased housing or a better walkable environment in the downtown area, but also not losing sight of what makes Bishop so special in its first place. And so throughout the document, we took great pains to make sure that even down to the color palettes that we suggested, that they're reflective of the Eastern Sierra or Bishop in particular. So the point is that this plan is right-sized for Bishop. The goals themselves, there's 3 core goals: growth management and housing. So getting more housing into the downtown area, mobility enhancement. So that's that pedestrian and friendly environment. And the intention there is to increase the dwell time of folks, both people driving down 395, people in Bishop specifically to visit, and then also Bishop residents, right? And all those users, what we're trying to do is make a more pleasant and welcoming environment for them. So basically, the goal is increasing dwell time, which is a term of art basically to describe what we don't want to do or what we want to dissuade, or we want to create an environment that encourages people not just stopping by a store to fulfill a particular errand, but rather to spend some time in downtown and complete a couple errands, or think of it as a place to meet people and be seen and be out in the community and be part of the community. Next slide, please. So this is our project boundaries map, the gray, and we'll zoom in a moment. So this is the whole city outline, right? And the gray is the specific plan, which covers all of downtown and beyond. And then the mixed use overlay, which covers a smaller subset of the study area. Of course, we really focus on Main Street and Line Street. And the intention of the mixed use overlay is to accommodate increased housing density and a mixture of uses on ground floor retail, for example. Whereas the specific plan also works to increase housing capacity, but you could think of it as like a little bit more toned down, not as intense. So the specific plan and mixed use overlay, now we've zoomed in, that gray still represents the specific plan. That component of the plan governs everything that's in the study area. So it's the boundaries here are derived from public input, city comments, our own analysis, workshops, interviews, discussions with this commission as well. And then the mixed use overlay, the dashed lines, the orange and blue are as I mentioned, a little bit higher intensity, nothing crazy, but a little bit higher building heights. And what's in the mixed use overlay, it's literally an overlay. It supersedes what's in the specific plan. But whereas if the specific plan, or if the mixed use overlay is silent on something, then we defer to the specific plan. As I mentioned, community input played a big role in the development of this plan. We are extremely fortunate to have so many engaged stakeholders. I want to emphasize that it's not every day that we get continuing folks and people following us through the entire process and working through disagreements and different visions and arriving at something that most people can be happy with. So this is a sample of some of the work that we did. We also talked with Caltrans and Chamber of Commerce and sent out emails. And basically the point is that we did a pretty thorough community engagement effort, both virtual and in person, visual preference polls where we got a temperature check for how high is too high, how big is too big, where would you like to see things. We even asked folks for their input on types of lighting and signage so that the urban streetscape components of the plan are also reflective of what feels Bishop to the residents. So now I will provide a brief overview of 4 key components from the plan, and then I will hand it off to Robert to discuss the CEQA components. So building height and massing, the intent here is to allow a framework for more mixed use development on the ground floor, while at the same time also supplying the resident or supplying or adding to the user base of potential patrons at the stores below. So basically, if the intention is to have more economic vitality downtown, and we know that the city has a housing need, then if we're able to concentrate that housing along the key corridors by increasing the building heights, increasing the types of building or types of uses that can occur on the first floor, and generally contributing to a more walkable downtown environment, then we're able to fulfill the vision, those 3 points that I derived at earlier. Again, this was totally workshopped with the public, where we're trying to limit the most intense building form. And out of that came the mixed use overlay zone, which, the mixed use overlay neighborhood transition zone, which effectively steps down the building heights as they go into the rest of the specific plan area. Next slide, please. So here in the public realm, we're looking beyond the street itself, just the curb to curb, but also looking to how do we increase the experience of people, either residents or visitors, whatever that might be. So outdoor dining, of course, came up in conversations, and we recognize the challenge both from noise and other experiential elements of the truck traffic on 395. And so we explored back of house dining, rooftop dining, tree palettes, colors for buildings, facades, everything to contribute to a welcoming downtown environment. And what you see on your screen here are 2 perspective renderings that are just working to fuse some of the components that are discussed in the plan. And more than anything, these are tools to help conversations along with developers and community members and arrive at something that everybody's happy with. Next slide, please. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that part of our public realm improvements also is a 1% development cost set aside for public art. We heard that loud and clear from your constituents as well, that there is a desire to leverage the fact that there already is a lot of murals in Bishop, but maybe get either more murals or other types of art within the downtown area as well, and use that as something to kind of tie the area together. Okay, so as it relates to parking, the plan, the first thing that we really drilled down to with residents and city staff is how much parking are we actually working with? Is there a parking deficit? Is there a parking need? And effectively, we counted all the parking guidelines within the plan are developed with the intent of not over parking the area, recognizing that there's limited land, that we're intending to expand development opportunities, not necessarily parking opportunities. And that there's also an abundance of parking. It's just sometimes it's hard to find if you're not from the area. If you don't know that right behind Main Street, a block off, there's parking lots, right? Or off Line Street, for example. So part of that in our plan, it references wayfinding and other ways that one can increase the visibility of these parking lots without building new ones. Now in the mixed use overlay zone, so in the downtown focus area, the city is exploring a parking fee in lieu pilot program. So this effectively says rather than building the number of parking spaces that you would be required to for a building of X height or X dimensions or X use, rather this fee will be applied, and that fee then allows the city to use those dollars elsewhere within the study area, but use them for either improving existing parking lots, making those wayfinding improvements that I just alluded to before, building a new parking lot if that need should arise, but basically allowing a little bit of flexibility so that the downtown can function more as a pedestrian space rather than an auto-oriented downtown. Next slide. So this is my final component and kind of dovetails exactly with the transition or maybe an expansion from an auto-oriented downtown to a pedestrian-oriented and cyclist-oriented area as well. So by improving the streetscape, the lighting, the wider sidewalks, the outdoor dining, the street trees, the things that we mentioned earlier, we're creating the bones of a place that welcomes someone onto the street, but we're not yet making it easy for people to access or either the downtown area or move through the downtown area. So the plan concludes with active transportation recommendations, taking advantage of the city size and topography, relatively flat, relatively small. Also recognizing the truck traffic along 395. And so what does that mean for us? Well, that means analyzing parallel roadways with lower volumes and speed, those that are still in the city jurisdiction, and not necessarily an anecdote or anecdote for improved bicycle or pedestrian access and improvements on Main and Line specifically, but these are alternative options that can be explored and certainly can happen in parallel to work on those two streets as well. So with that, I will hand over to my colleague, Robert Edgerton at Helix Environmental Planning to discuss the CEQA work today.
Hi.
Sorry.
Sound like. There we go. Good evening, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioners. Robert Edgerton, Helix Environmental. It's my pleasure to be with you this evening. Through the slide, please. If I may just take a second before I get started, I wanted to acknowledge some of the important members of this project that I've worked with. First and foremost, Planning and Design, veterans who just gave this presentation. Together a fantastic specific the city, one of the best I've ever seen in 5 years. I'd also like to acknowledge city staff, City Administrator Sean for his review of our document before it went out for public review, and for Elaine Kabbalah for her guidance and dedication throughout this process. Both these individuals are very committed, dedicated, tireless employees. The city is very lucky to have them. As was mentioned, my name is Robert Edgerton with Helix Environmental, and I'd like to just give you a brief overview, if I could, of the CEQA process, that's the California Environmental Quality Act process of this plan. The first slide just shows you that there's 4 key components of the CEQA process, and that is to inform decision makers such as yourself, as well as the public, about the effects of the proposed project. It's to identify ways to avoid or significantly reduce environmental impacts. It's to prevent significant avoidable environmental impacts by requiring changes in the project to the maximum extent feasible. And finally, to disclose the reasons why, if a project is approved with significant impacts, why that is. We'll get into that this evening. And the city opted to prepare an environmental impact report, what we call an EIR. That's That's the highest and most comprehensive tier of secret documentation. Provides the city with the most legally defensible document, and that's important given living document status that SEIR has for the city for the next 20 years. Next slide, please. This slide describes the CEQA process that this project has gone through to date. Back in May, June of 2021, the city opened what's called the notice of preparation period. And during a meeting, a scoping meeting, during that period, the city solicited input from agencies and the public for recommendations on the content of the EIR. Then the city, including the consulting team, went about preparing the draft EIR, and it was released for public comment, 45-day comment period in May through July of this year. And at that stage, the city was soliciting input from the public and agencies on the adequacy of the EIR. And it should be noted that no comments were received during this public comment period. Highly unusual. Some positive and a lot of negative. The city received none, and I hope that's because it was such a comprehensive document. Finally, down at the final block here, we're on the home stretch. And this is where you, the planning commission, council, consider your recommendation for of the project and the EIR. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this slide. Tim already introduced the specific plans, goals and objectives. And what I just wanted to show was reiterate that the specific plan goals and objectives were the same in the EIR. So there was direct crossover between the two living documents. It really creates that seamless connection, given that this is a program level EIR that living document for the next 20 years of planning efforts in the city. Next slide, please. Yes. No problem.
You could move the microphone.
Better? I can get a lot louder if you want.
Yeah, I'm getting feedback that the audio.
Okay.
Thank you.
You
I
bet.
apologize.
One very important aspect of an EIR is consideration of project alternatives. That is a requirement, and I just wanted to go over those with you briefly here this evening. First off, there's the proposed project, and the proposed project was a high development scenario that would be implemented over a period of 20 years. It assumed that 25% of all parcels in the specific plan and 30% of all parcels in the mixed-use overlay would be developed with 2 additional housing units per parcel. And this results in approximately 373 new housing units, housing 840 residents. That's the proposed project. The first alternative was the no project alternative, whereby the downtown specific plan and the mixed overlay would not be implemented. Residential development would continue with this in the city at its current rate and pace, meaning that approximately 24 housing units would be developed over the next 20 years, providing residences for approximately 54 people. The next alternative that the city considered was entitled the restricted height development alternative. Under this scenario, it's a high development scenario that restricts building heights to 2 stories. It assumed that 25% of the parcels in the specific plan area would be developed with 2 additional housing units per parcel, resulting in approximately 346 new housing units over 20 years, or residences for 779 individuals. Next slide, please. The medium development alternative assumed that 15% of the parcels in the specific plan area and 25% of the parcels in the mixed-use overlay would be developed with 2 additional housing units per parcel, realizing 261 new housing units over the 20-year period for approximately 588 residents. Finally, the low development alternative And this one was identified as being the environmentally superior alternative, which again is required under CEQA, was a low development scenario, which assumes 5% of all parcels in the specific plan area and 15% of all parcels in the mixed-use overlay would be developed to additional housing units, resulting in 123 new housing units for approximately 277 people. Next slide. Another requirement of an EIR is consideration and adoption of a mitigation monitoring and reporting program. This is a list of the mitigation measures that were incorporated into the environmental impact report, reducing significant impacts for all of the topic areas listed here. So biological resources, cultural resources, geology and soil, quality, tribal resources, and utilities and service systems. With these individual mitigation measures being implemented, impacts to those issue areas would be reduced to below a level of significance. Next slide, please. There is an area that remains significant and unavoidable, and that is the aesthetics, impacts to aesthetics. Proposed development would be visible from officially designated and eligible state scenic highways. Building heights that may be realized through implementation of the specific plan may block views from existing development. And although background vistas would remain visible, views could be impeded throughout the specific plan or mixed use overlay area, and that results in a potentially substantial adverse effect. No feasible mitigation exists. And what is important to know is, as part of adoption of the specific plan, design guidelines would be employed and the city would be able to direct development using those guidelines as well. Although the impact conclusion of significant and unavoidable remains, the impact is lessened due to the greater predominant view shed in the immediate area. And as documented in the required findings of fact and statement of overriding considerations, which is part of your packet before you this evening, the unavoidable impacts have been lessened by the economic, legal, social, technological, and other benefits of the proposed project. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I just wanted to describe a little bit about the findings of fact and statement of overriding considerations. No lead agency shall approve a project which identifies a significant environmental impact without first adopting findings. Those findings are dedicated and committed in the statement of overriding considerations before you this evening. CEQA requires you, the decision makers, to balance the economic, legal, social, technological, and other benefits of a proposed project against the unavoidable environmental risks when determining whether to approve the project. If those benefits outweigh the unavoidable adverse environmental effects, the environmental adverse effects that are considered adverse may be determined acceptable. These findings shall be stated in writing and supported by substantial evidence in the record. And again, I would point you to the findings of fact and statement of overriding considerations. That concludes my portion of the presentation. Elaine, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Next slide, please, Christina. To conclude the presentation of the plan and the EIR this evening, I did want to take a little time to talk about how this plan will be implemented and what the next steps are. And I'd like to do that to inform your commission, inform your council about your role in ensuring the implementation of this plan, if you so choose to recommend adoption, and also to set the expectation of the community. I know that during the public outreach component of this project, the In Your Register would publish some of the wonderful renderings with 3 stories on top of Rusty's And I'd field phone calls in my offices asking when the city planned to get that done. And so I do think it's important to set the stage of a reasonable expectation about how this plan will be implemented. As I think Tim mentioned, I certainly heard Robert mention, a specific plan or a general plan has a 20-year implementation horizon typically. There are components of this plan that will be implemented over time. There are components that can be implemented quickly, and full realization of this will take, a generation of time and a great deal of moving pieces working together. I would start by saying that the specific plan itself includes a chapter on implementation and next steps. So there is a more full discussion within the document than I'll provide this evening. It also includes several strategies for funding, ranging from standard available state and federal grants to the development of financing mechanisms that are used by other communities like business improvement districts. Tax increment financing is no longer available to municipalities in the state of California, but there are similar types of mechanisms for raising revenue for implementation of downtown plans such as these. I'd like to remind your commission that the plan itself is a foundation for grant funding. Often when you go to Caltrans or Housing and Community Development or whatever the funding source might be, they want to see a demonstration that there is a plan in place. It's very difficult to get funding for an idea that hasn't been documented, particularly those funding agencies, government funding agencies, always want to see a demonstration of public input and political support. And that's what this document provides, which means that there are components within this that can be pulled out, and they may not be finalized engineered plans. I think wayfinding is a very good example, that one could go for grant funding and say, we have a plan within the city of Bishop. It has been developed through community input. It has been adopted by our city council, and we are now seeking funds to implement the specific project concept. Implementation will also occur over time through investment in infill, redevelopment, and new projects. So the city will be responsible for implementation in the public realm, but in very, very limited instances would the city be responsible for implementation on private property. So we will work in partnership with developers as they seek to improve their existing buildings, take advantage of the entitlements that are granted through these policies to develop housing projects. As Robert stated, the design guidelines will be a tool that your commission and the council can use to work with partners to shape the implementation of this vision over time. And then finally, the city can accelerate implementation by investing in the strategies that are identified in the plan consistently in the public realm. And as I said, there's several specific strategies that are called out by the implementation chapter. And I'd just like to highlight some of those where the city would have particular responsibilities for implementation over time. And the first is adopting the specific plan and codifying the mixed use ordinance. That would be the first and highest step that the city can take towards its implementation, and that's where we are this evening. The second is to consider establishing benefit assessment districts and development impact fees. It's a standard fee structure that most cities and communities have associated with new development that is used to reinvest in the impacts created by new development to make infrastructure improvements and improve the public realm. The city should establish a design review board, and within your packet, there is a resolution for your consideration to recommend adoption of the specific plan to the city council. And the city council resolution would empower the planning commission to act as the design review board until design guidelines are fully in place, and the city could consider establishing a separate design review board. The city should focus efforts on improving the streetscape consistent with the recommendations of the plan And you would see within the plan, I don't know the exact page, there's almost like there's a matrix. It's like a menu of options about what streetscape treatments would be appropriate for Line Street, Main Street, and secondary streets. The city can expand the urban street canopy, which is important for urban cooling and improving the pedestrian environment and making downtown more inviting. City can work to implement the wayfinding program that's recommended by the plan, investing in gateway monuments as recommended by the plan, seeking to improve the pedestrian and bicycle facilities that are identified in the active transportation recommendations that Tim presented. And then finally, looking for those state and federal funding opportunities on a regular and consistent basis to apply towards the plan recommendations. With that, I would once again like to thank our consulting team for their assistance in putting this together for the City of Bishop. At this time, staff would recommend that your Planning Commission hold the public hearing, and following a public hearing and discussion, staff requests that the Planning Commission adopt 3 resolutions in sequence. The first resolution recommends the City Council certify the environmental impact report and statement of overriding considerations. And the environmental review action must take place prior to the adoption of the specific plan and the ordinance. The final environmental impact report that is included by reference in the resolution incorporates the mitigation, monitoring, and reporting program, the findings of fact, and the statement of overriding considerations. Second, staff would request that your commission adopt a resolution for recommending that the City Council adopt the downtown specific plan and mixed use overlay. And finally, staff requests that your commission adopt a resolution recommending the City Council adopt an ordinance adding Chapter 46, which will codify the mixed use overlay zone into the zoning ordinance, adding Chapter 47, which would adopt the mixed use transition zone to the zoning ordinance, amending the definitions for motel and hotel, which would make the definitions of hotel and motel consistent with the California Building Code and minimize the ability of developers to be speculative in developing housing units and making them available as short-term rentals. And then finally, amending the commercial parking standards to allow for compact parking spaces as an option for all commercial development, which we currently do not have in our code. This concludes presentation for staff presentation for this evening, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Maybe if there are no general questions, we can close the public hearing portion and then go to discussion and have more specific questions. There are no other members of the general public in attendance tonight, unless you had something to add. Okay, so seeing that there is no other member of the public, the public hearing portion is closed and the discussion will open. The Planning Commission discussion is opened.
Blaine, I had a very just kind of general follow-up question. So, you know, you mentioned there's sort of a 20-year horizon for.
Sure.
Is that better? Just for you, Heather. Yeah, so you mentioned there's a 20-year horizon for implementation. Can you speak a little bit to, so the ordinances that we're considering tonight, you know, adopt the environmental impact report and the mitigation plan, but then the recommendation to the City Council for, you know, codifying the mixed use overlays, and those codify parts of the downtown specific plan, the recommendations into law, right? So there's like permitted uses, there are not explicitly not permitted uses. But then in that vast document, there's just a set of guidelines, right? Which then serve as a guiding principle for development, for the city, for, you know, the Planning Commission, if we're going to serve as a review board until we have, you know, other guidelines in place. What's the timeline for sort of reevaluating those guidelines? Like, you know, if 10 years from now, let's say, magically Caltrans decides to send trucks somewhere else than down Main Street, and we have opportunities for new types of development. Would we revisit those guidelines at that point? Is this going to be a living document where we're constantly sort of tweaking things? Or are we committed to, we will not change this for 20 years, you know, that sort of thing?
Yes, thank you. So I'm not entirely sure that this is your question, but I did want to provide a little clarification and something I heard in your question. So similar to the signage ordinance, which we did pull that out and codify separately from this document. We're doing the same with the development standards for the mixed use overlay and the mixed use transition overlay. The balance of that specific plan doesn't need to be codified within the municipal code, but through its adoption, development within the specific plan area would still need to be consistent with the guidelines, the design guidelines and the landscaping guidelines and so on that are included in the document. But moreover, the document, both the specific plan and the mixed use overlay, provide an added value to the property owners seeking to do something with their property. So staff is looking for those 3 actions, which would adopt the specific plan and then codify the ordinances separately. To get back to, I just want to make sure that was clear. And then to answer your question more directly, this is a living document. And the commission and the council can come back and modify it as deemed appropriate. The same is true with the ordinance. In fact, I would anticipate that we probably will want to revisit in a couple of years or we'll find a need potentially to revisit in a couple of years and say, you know, this isn't working exactly the way it is, or, you know, maybe if we, I think we did the same thing with the accessory dwelling unit ordinance where we adopted it. We heard that people couldn't do units over garages due to height. And so we came back and we tweaked it a little bit. So that's a living document in the code. The council and the commission can make requests as appropriate to modify that in the future. The same is true for this specific plan document as well, that it can be amended as appropriate and needed in the future. Certainly would want to give it a little time to breathe and see how it's working before modifying it, of course. And as I said, the specific plan adoption will put, for instance, our design guidelines in place for new development. The design guidelines proposed within the document are not as prescriptive as I have seen in other communities. That was intentional because Bishop has a little bit more of an individualistic spirit. We certainly want to be able to honor that. But if deemed appropriate by the council in the future to develop something that is more defined and prescriptive, then they can give staff that direction.
Another question for Dishon. Dustin, with the height going to 36 feet, 38 feet, how is the fire marshal? We have enough, you know, there's ladder in case of a fire, stuff like that?
Well, I think it was brought up about development fees, and those development fees could be used to fund fire department to get ladder trucks that will reach you. You're absolutely correct. We do not have it right now.
Mhm.
So hopefully, as this develops, we would be able to, capture development fees that would cover things like that, would be the point of them.
Elaine, the funding that are going to come from the federal, state, or the agency, what role is the federal government we are expecting or you expecting? Because the federalists are the most important part of the whole game.
Yes, true. And I just wanted to address your previous question also, which is that this plan was, of course, developed with input from the fire department. In fact, I don't think we embarked until discussing if he'd be comfortable with a height increase, and the fire chief said that he would be. And as we've developed projects, he is included on all new developments to make sure that they meet the fire code as well, which we'll get to your funding question in a moment, but I do think that's perhaps a salient point in setting the expectations for the commission and the council and the public, which is that this creates, reduces entitlement barriers for certain types of development, but it doesn't address things that will arise in the building code or in the fire code about a commercial to residential conversion and the requirements for meeting energy efficiency codes, and in particular new fire codes. And that's something we've seen in some of the conditional use permits that we've approved, that they are then subject to things like fire sprinkling once they get entitlements from the planning commission. To address your question regarding federal funding, it would depend on the type of federal funding opportunity that's available. Federal projects come with, I'm not going to say necessarily more, though that wouldn't be wrong, but certainly different strings than California state funding. But if you consider, for instance, the infrastructure package that was passed, that could serve as a potential funding source in the future that would be federal. And this plan both serves as a foundation to say, we want to make these types of streetscape improvements or road improvements, maybe being able to access some of the grant funding through that bill, and then govern what that looks like according to the plan that has been adopted by the city. Did this answer your question, Commissioner Bakta?
A little bit. Okay. One more question. When the city and the developer were doing the survey with the height of the building, do you know what percentage say was good? Because the east side of Main Street, like East Pine and the area, people cannot going to see the mountain, and they're going to be protesting because they cannot see the mountain. Because I'm seeing in past city, people say, if you approve that project, I'll move out from Bishop. I'll sell my house. So
I could not give you a geographic distribution of the approval, and I don't know. I know that there was an analysis on a percentage basis of respondents to different components of the plan. I don't think that that was included for height. I do know that that's that the heights that are proposed were developed out of the public input, where there was different alternatives presented. There was a higher alternative and there was a lower alternative. And this was the preference that was demonstrated by the community. And that was during the workshop that we held. And you may remember we rented a space on Main Street and held an open design charrette for 5 days, where the public could come and have one-on-one meetings. And so it was a pretty in-depth fact-finding mission. I certainly understand concerns about, and there was testimony provided, at that meeting that people were like, well, if you build to 2 stories or 3 stories, we won't be able to see the mountains. And I understand that concern. I think you can't see the mountains on Main Street now anyway, because if you're standing next to a 1-story building, you wouldn't be able to see them. And if you look at the statement of overriding considerations, which is Appendix B, though I can make it very easy for you, it's the very last page of the EIR. If you look at that photo evidence really is provided to discuss this impact on aesthetics, which is that if you look at the first picture on photograph 1, which is taken at approximately Main and Line, you can see based on the Monument Bank building that if you raise the height on that first block to 3 stories, it would block your view of.
I think we're all trying to find.
Okay, see, go to tab B, which is where the specific plan starts.
Thank you.
And then go to the page right in front of that. Right in front. It's the very last page of the very fat document. Huh. I wonder if someone was looking for this. Thank you, Commissioner Lind. What we're looking for is these photos of Bishop. So if you look at that and you imagine with your mind's eye that the Monument Bank building is 3 stories tall, you can see from a block off of Main Street that you would not have views of Mount Tom. But if you look at the photo further down, which is taken from about Johnston Avenue in East Bishop, you can see that the scale of the mountains and the landscape in Bishop, the Monument Bank building is dwarfed. And so if you just step back, possibly, and I don't think we provided this analysis, but possibly outside the specific plan area where those heights would even be allowed, you would not be blocking the views of the mountains. Our mountains are very tall.
I had a question.
Which one? Not sure, the question said, which one?
Which question?
Yeah.
Well, I know we've talked about it before, but without sounding uninformed, we are keeping in mind the impacts on schools, hospitals, utilities, sewer, water, power, EMS services. I mean, plus 900 people in 20 years is have a huge impact on your school system. Not counting being able to flush your toilet. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, so the EIR does provide an analysis of the utilities, wastewater, drinking water. The mitigation monitoring report also includes in certain thresholds to make sure that a
40
project is
feet.
addressing that. And that is one of that's one of the reasons that I suggest things like the adoption of development impact fees within that. I think one of the things that this plan seeks to address is that we have a problem with our schools and our hospitals now because there's inadequate housing. How do we balance all those things? And I don't know that this is a perfect answer, but it's potentially part of a solution to address that housing issue. The development impact fees are intended to be then reinvest to address the impacts of that added growth. And then also with any sort of building permit that is issued, there's school impact fees. They're actually quite substantial. I don't remember what the number is, but they're always staggering to me.
But who gets that money?
The school does.
They do.
It goes directly to the school.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's not like the city's like, oh, yay, we got impact fee. And now the school's scrambling to try and build
No,
3 classrooms.
this-
and
this development would perpetuate school fees that go directly back into the school for funding.
I mean, I would imagine it's a pretty intricate dance when you're talking about multiple utility providers and trash is county and, all the overflow that occurs when you add 900 people is a chunk of humans in this small square area. So, okay.
But historically, Bishop has been bigger as well. In my father-in-law's time in the 60s and in the 40s, there were more people in the area. Not to say that we have a structure now as it is to accommodate, but it's not, these 900 and something people are not going to turn up in 2, 3, 4 years. It's going to be staggered theoretically.
Yeah,
As money, it comes in to develop.
That is correct.
it's important to keep in mind that, this isn't a magic wand that's gonna suddenly drop 1,000 people in Bishop tomorrow, right? This is relaxing, creating entitlements and relaxing zoning restrictions so that we can allow for more housing. And the population pressures that have always been on Bishop will continue to be the same. And a few people will trickle in and a few people will trickle out, but there'll be more opportunities. That's how I see it.
Well, and on your question about at what point do we review the plan, it sounds like when it comes to need that we can review it. What happens if in 5 years we don't have the development that we had desired? I mean, how are we auditing grants and making sure that we're meeting the benchmarks necessary and that type of thing?
Yeah, and I'll add to, I think something that's kind of important that Elaine should get a lot of credit for right now is there's a large investment company that has come to see us because of this plan, and that's what it's going to take to make it happen. And going backwards, just to kind of reassure you, we operate a sewer plant, wastewater treatment plant that runs at 1/3 capacity. We have more than sufficient room, and we have plenty of water. And again, Robert, all these things were taken into high consideration when we were doing it. So, and again, getting back to, I think what Eric said, this is, in 20 years, if this is completely done, I think we would be amazed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only going to go as fast as it can go.
I'm just throwing it out there. So we
No, I
all
agree.
have a
No, and I just want to reassure you that I think Those have all been very well vetted already.
Thank you for your question, Commissioner. If I could just add to what Elaine and Destin have already said, this is a program level environmental impact report. It's not project specific. So this is not the last bite of the apple that the commission and potentially city council get, depending on an application that comes in. An applicant comes forth, they seek entitlement from the planning folks at the counter. Before they can get a building permit or a grading permit, they have to prove that they have gone through the EIR and met each one of the hurdles for each one of the subject areas, including utilities and public service systems. If at some stage they can't prove that they're under the threshold that has been identified and analyzed in the EIR, then they have to do an additional level of documentation and bring that back to this commission and the city council for consideration. I hope that helps.
I had a couple slightly more specific questions about the EIR. The first was, I noticed in the staff report and then in the specific plan document, the exact boundaries of the overlay regions, I think have crept over time, right? And so I think the downtown overlay has grown a little bit to the north. There's been that chunk off of Yaney, I think, added to it. And I was just wondering, do the boundaries that are going to be the final boundaries for the overlay regions and for the downtown specific plan, do they match the boundaries that were considered when the EIR was produced? And do we have any, if they don't match, I mean, we're not talking about widely different areas. Do we take the EIR to be broadly considered enough that even if the boundaries were a little bit different than what was specifically considered for the EIR, that the EIR still applies to the whole region? Does that make sense? My rambling question.
Yes, Commissioner Leach, I
Okay.
thoroughly hear and understand your question. Thank you. Just trying to.
That's my question then,
Discretion.
just while you're looking that up, is I did notice that when we had spoken about including Yaney and previous meetings, on the map, it didn't look like it went
So
as far as I had thought. So does that kind of play into what you were talking about as well?
yeah, I think so. Elaine, I'm looking at there's the mixed use overlay boundaries in the Helix document, which doesn't have page numbers, I think, but it's towards the end. And then on page 121 of the specific plan, there's kind of the equivalent.
Kind of find the map here. Oh, I can't see what you're referring to.
So here, I can show you if you want. If you go to the Helix document, it's like maybe 10 pages before Appendix C.
Okay.
And it looks like this. It's that one.
Appendix C. Thank you for putting that in there.
Okay, there.
Well, they're not numbered.
Oh,
10
But-
pages before Appendix C.
If you go to
Is
Appendix,
it within the presentation?
it's in section A. It's under tab A. And it's part of the.
Oh, is it perhaps this one here I'm looking at?
That's not quite the one that I was
It's a
looking at.
pinky blue one, right? that you-
Maybe that'll do.
One that says mixed use overlay boundaries.
Yeah, mixed use overlay boundaries. And it's in one of the appendices. I think it's in
So
appendix
you're in A, but you're gonna find.
A here. This is the one.
Okay.
specifically that I was looking at?
That's
Okay,
right.
yeah. And then if you look on page 120.
Okay, here's this one.
These are the two that I was comparing.
There.
Well, yeah, and so here you can see like, if you look here, the mixed use overlay ends right there with this little funny, kind
Yeah.
of horse head shape. And here then it's extended
Oh, yeah.
west, and then we've added a bit on Yang. And I mean, they're all within the specific plan.
Plan, but not in the actual
But
overlay.
the overlay boundaries have changed a little bit, and I just wanted to make sure that the EIR covers.
You're right. I agree. I think that's
Yeah.
just a.
Wasn't laughing at the situation.
It's basically.
Student, I have a student that says.
Appendix A.
Yeah, do we have to
Phrases.
reconsider the EIR, or is it sufficient?
Say that's one of them. Yeah.
Out of one of my favorite movies.
Better miles.
These are specifically the two maps I was originally looking at. And so I was just saying, the overlay boundaries have changed. Where the neighborhood, the downtown overlay used to be here. We've added this and north. And so I was just wondering, does the current EIR document cover all of this even if the boundaries have shifted a little bit of time?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner, and I've consulted with Elaine on this matter. Elaine, do you want to tackle the parcel issue first that we were just discussing? Do you want me to tackle it?
So first, I'll just provide the explanation of the discrepancy, and then from there, I think I'll turn it over to Robert with an expertise on how that would impact the environmental plan, particularly given that modification of the mixed use boundary within the specific plan boundary. And so that particular parcel extension is to include a vacant piece of property that is available for development, that is adjacent to the mixed use boundary.
The extension to the west.
Yes. And that was modified following the public review of the environmental impact report.
So given the fact that the boundary was slightly modified following a public review, it was not incorporated into the analysis that was completed. So out of an abundance of caution, I would suggest that that parcel be removed from consideration. And the way that that parcel could be put back into the process is through the addendum process. So CEQA allows you, specifically with a program EIR such as this, to bring that parcel back forward and do a review of the potential impacts from development of that parcel against the EIR. And if their triggers are below the thresholds as identified in the EIR, then it could be incorporated that way.
Does the EIR, I'm sorry, does the EIR, I didn't see an actual map of the boundaries that were considered in the EIR.
It's based on the specific plan. The specific plan was an appendix to the EIR and it's
Okay.
incorporated by reference.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question back to the funding portion. Elaine, you mentioned that this can lead us to grants, funding. This has to be in place first, but it's getting us there. Can you speak more to the specifics of that? How much more? Are we talking about a lot more opportunities or just a few? Or have we researched, have we even gone down that road at all yet? Because we haven't signed off on it.
I only give you my own anecdotal experience,
Fine.
which is in fact the plan itself. So this plan is entirely grant funded. And I think had we pursued a large grant for this, I mean, the state of California is very favorable to these right now, to plans that will increase housing. There's a great deal of policies and funding opportunities in place to support specifically this kind of thing. though not large enough to do it at the scale, and environmental review is almost never grant funded. So that was a particularly good opportunity provided by these three different grant sources. But I think one of the tools that we were really able to leverage and that has been effective for us in the grants that we've gotten is to be able to reference the plans we have in place. And so I think one of the tools that there was two tools specifically that were leveraged to get the grants in place to fund this project. One was the economic development plan adopted by the city in 2015 that identified the development of this type of plan and then mixed use zoning overlay as specific actions. And then secondly, we were awarded a technical assistance grant, which came with no funding. And you may remember having attended some of those public input meetings at the fairgrounds. And again, because there was documented public support and a documented plan saying these are the recommended actions for achieving the goals and the vision that Bishop has for itself, then we could go out to funding agencies and provide that documented support and project recommendation for funding. In recent grants that the city has written, whether they've been awarded or not, again, that demonstration of adopted policy is often a requested item. A demonstration of community support is a requested item. So, I mean, I think the extent to which the plan can be leveraged to increase grant opportunities, absolutely, it is a tool to do that. It's largely contingent on what sort of funding opportunities will be available, how large they are, and what the capacity is of the city to be implementing those projects.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hank, I'll just add some more anecdotal responses. But at the commissioner training that I went to a few months ago up in Mammoth, there were some representatives from the state housing and community development office there. And they talked about funding opportunities for communities and community development. And they stressed repeatedly that having a plan was practically mandatory for accessing most of those grants. And that even where it wasn't mandatory, it dramatically increased your ability to get money. Yeah, just
Yeah. no, just-
for what that's worth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I understand.
Yeah.
That's useful. Thank you.
I have some questions. I love the work that has gone into this process. Just wanted to say that at the outset. But I still have a hard time picturing in my head what 49 feet, the 46 plus the 3 projection would look like in Bishop. And whenever I've left town, I've always had a look around just to see what that might look like. But can I ask if the Bishop Twin, Ben Franklin, the Methodist Church, the Masonic Temple, they're above 36 feet or the 30 feet that are the limits at the moment?
I apologize, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. And I'm trying to think that I feel like the Masonic Temple is, for me, a landmark I've used a lot when I'm
Sure,
in
and it's,
town,
if you're
and
inside, it's super tall. I guess it's
About
just
what
to
this
help
would-
me visualize what 49 feet would look like on the street. And all the renderings are beautiful, but I can only find maybe 1 or 2 that are 4-story. And whether or not 4 stories equals 46 feet, or and whether or not a lot of these 3-story renderings are actually 40-something feet. I just don't have the sense of scale. And so like when I went through Tonopah, it was, it felt kind of I think those are 5-story buildings,
Yeah.
but I don't want that to happen to Bishop.
Yeah, so the buildings in Tonopah, so 2 references of scale. An average building floor is typically 10 to 12 feet. And so I think the benchmark that I would use, and I was just trying to remember if the Masonic Temple is 3 stories, but it's probably around 36 feet.
Taller ceilings
And room for, space between the
Right.
floors for building infrastructure.
I mean, I live in a 3-story house, so I should talk, but And, that's not in conforming to anything, but I'm just trying to get an idea of what it would look like. There's a one rendering of a 4-story
Very dark and narrow.
in Exhibit A.
Streets are very broad.
They are, I guess, but if there's 0 setback,
I don't know if I can show you this, but it's a photograph that I took in Montana recently, and there are 3 to 4 story buildings and
if there's a 3, and I can live with that, I guess.
yeah, but it's a very tall three stories.
Right.
But it didn't feel claustrophobic at all, and they have 2 lanes of street parking, but the same width, effectively Main Street. Yeah, I was specifically looking.
Right, what would that look like?
Because it's a similar sized town to Bishop, and
And, go ahead,
The
sorry.
buildings in Tonopah are 6 stories.
Okay, 6. Okay, so no wonder it felt like this isn't gonna, yeah. And so there's a mention earlier in the document that anything above 26 feet would trigger the need to provide design to, I guess, the planning commission for,
It's everything, all development would still fall within the city's review process of submitting an application, making sure it's consistent with the guidelines. If the city council empowers the planning commission to serve as the design review board, coming before you to make sure it's consistent with that.
so we would possibly never get another, like the East Line Street apartment complex conditional use permit application that had the blank wall facing East Line Street ever again.
Yes, as I said, there's very prescriptive architectural guidelines in existence that I've seen. Ours are not quite so specific, but they do make, suggestions and recommendations to people that you need to have windows in the building, ideally, specifically on the street facing side. I think they're very basic guidelines, but given the types of projects that we've reviewed where they need some basic guidelines, I think
Yeah.
that's appropriate.
And it felt like the developer in that situation was like, you want your windows? And they picked the tiniest window / door they could think of to fulfill. So as long as there was that oversight,
Yes.
then I feel a lot more comfortable about.
And that is what the plan will provide. And again, anecdotally, it's been nice, for instance, to have the signage guidelines in place. And then we had this discussion when we adopted the signage ordinance that prior to that, there was no mechanism the city had to engage in a conversation with someone doing a project about what we'd like to see, how it's consistent with the character of the community. And so by having these guidelines in place, again, they're not onerous or overly specific, but they do give the city that opportunity to provide feedback and weigh in on making sure that development is appropriate for the built environment that we want to be investing in as a community.
And dovetailing into that, one of the renderings of a 4-story building on Exhibit A, Section B, Exhibit A, page 131 or 132. 131. Regarding setbacks. So it's the only picture on that page. And I know that something like a setback starting at what would be the second floor could be something that would make it less profitable for a developer. But that could be something that could be considered.
It could make it less profitable for a developer, and it is something that's proposed, not within that densest mixed use overlay for the downtown, but in the step back,
Okay. The transitional, but
in the transition.
it said it could also be considered throughout the plan area. In my mind's eye, if it felt like too many buildings were just kind of making the street claustrophobic, could a compromise be done by a planning oversight committee saying that the setback would be on the top floor, so you don't have 4 stories right on the,
Mhm.
so then what you're visually looking at is 3 from the street or the sidewalk. Allowing for more, for a developer to still realize square footage.
Certainly. I'm just pausing to think about how to incorporate that.
But well, sorry,
But I don't think
Tricia,
that's-
is the question whether that needs to be added to an ordinance or is the question, you know, will we still have the
We
oversight?
still have
to
the
make those
oversight,
decisions.
But,
Right.
but I guess if in the ordinance, it's codified that you could go up to 46 plus 3, or is it, yeah, 46 plus 3. That's not a right per se. That's, you still have to jump through the hoops to make architectural sense, community sense.
Elaine, it was my understanding that every project that'll be proposed within the overlay areas will have to be approved, right?
By the planning commission.
By the planning commission, or at least by the planning department.
Yeah,
in
I
some
think the
form.
answer is no. I'm just trying to like,
Was it 26 feet is the, one of the triggers? As,
that I'm just trying to think about the different types of projects that we get. So I'm just,
Farracoso remodel was done.
Well, I guess my question is more specific. Having the downtown, well, the specific plan area and the overlays, does that automatically effectively trigger a CUPS process for any development that's
I
done
think
within
for
those
the
areas?
development that Trisha's discussing, where we're going to be talking about a very large development that is probably going to be a redevelopment, you know, yes, that would trigger a design review. Will all projects come through? No. So actually, and now I've actually got a very good example. One of the intents of the plan is to remove the need to come into the planning commission. So where there's, for instance, the types of conditional use permits that we have been considering over the past year, where there are houses within commercial zones that someone wants to make into a house again, that type of project will not come before the planning commission.
Because the mixed use overlay allows for it.
Because the mixed use overlay will allow for it to be a residence.
Yeah, I have a somewhat related question in terms of kind of what triggers what here, specifically around the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit of how that functions within this plan, because obviously the plan is the 20-year scale. Is the MMRP something that kind of remains in effect at all times and it gets triggered on an individual development basis?
Yes, I thank you for asking that question. I forgot to mention that in my overview of implementation. As Mr. Edgerton had presented, this is a programmatic EIR, which means that it does environmental analysis of the impacts of the policy within the plan area at a very high level. And then it identifies those mitigations such that when a project comes through, the city is responsible by adopting that mitigation monitoring and reporting program. We're responsible for enforcing that. And so we would be responsible for looking at the potential impacts as appropriate on a site-specific basis and sort of going through that mitigation monitoring program as a checklist. So I think a good example that's included in there is concerns about the Owens dace, which is a fish. And if someone is going to be redeveloping a property or developing a new property on Line Street that's not associated with any waterways, then we wouldn't have any mitigations associated with fish.
That makes sense.
Just a follow on to Andrew's follow on. So if for any project that's proposed, how does that turn into, you know, a Swainson's Hawk survey? Like who initiates that or who decides that has to happen?
The city bishop staff.
Okay.
Similarly to how we would perform an initial study in-house for a negative declaration or mitigated
Okay.
negative.
Okay. So then the onus will be on the city to say, These are all the hoops you have to jump through before you can start the project.
Correct.
Okay.
And then as appropriate, studies would be required by a qualified professional.
One last question that kind of relates to that. You mentioned a design review board. How does that function and what would trigger something to come before that board to see? Is it similar, like up to city staff to determine whether or not it's something that warrants coming before design review board?
So that's, that hasn't been, that procedurally has not been defined by the plan. And I believe that it's in the resolution, one of the resolutions to the city council, possibly the one adopting the specific plan, it's that directs staff to come up with those procedures. And my read on this as staff would be that any project that addresses facade improvements, signage, large development as discussed, would be subject to the design review committee.
Procedurally this evening, are we considering all of these resolutions together or are we going to
Have the option-
approve the EIR first?
Have the option of doing them all together.
Yeah.
Or parsing them out if we had addendums or things that we wanted to.
Okay.
But may I follow up? There's a sequence, right? We have to do one, then another, then another.
There is a sequence, but as Chair Liu suggested, given that there hasn't been a substantial number of revisions, it is possible to make a single motion adopting all three resolutions in sequence, perhaps with a direction in for the second resolution to remove the parcel on Hammond Street, which was not analyzed by the EIR. Thank you. Could I request a recess for 30 seconds? Sure. Thank you.
Can we have a recess for like 2 minutes if we're gonna continue on for any length of time so I can?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
I mean,
Thank you.
Let you know when it's ready. Trying to get there. Trying to get the system a little bit. Why is it? Okay, there we go.
Resuming from our. The break here. 7:42. Sorry, 37. Would anyone like to?
Well, not really procedural, but I guess my question is for city staff, but resolution PC. The one that codifies. This. There are many problems with this document, like not the content, but the format. And there are, I think there is one. About, there are lots of why steps like that. Well, the sections, the lettered sections, are contiguous. Some of them didn't get properly indented. I can make my mark up.
Oh. I apologize, I'm following. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So do we need to make those corrections before we approve it?
No, you don't. Need to. That sounds like it's a clerical error, and I appreciate you.
It's all over
I
the map,
see
but
what
it's
you're
upset.
talking about now. Yeah, they're like O2O, then it's like a 3O. I apologize. I'm wondering if that's an oversight of
Microsoft Word going
track change was a mistake. So my apologies for that.
there is, I think, one glaring. It was in the neighborhood transition overlays. But under what in here is numbered 1747-30 division. But there are many such numbered. It says M, automobile development. And these were all, I believe, explicitly not permitted.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It also seems like it's a definite.
And in fact, it says right below.
Right.
So I think what's M in this document needs to be.
Thank you.
I think that was the only content. At least this is.
Would the addendums that we have already be enough to require separate action on each item? Make a motion.
You can, I believe, make a motion on them as a whole. And with the caveat at the end to the modifications to the the specific plan addressing the Hammond parcel and the clerical errors in ordinance as presented by H. If we might pause for a moment. I just want to check with Ms. Cole and make sure that the mics are on. Our Zoom participants. Okay.
And the Zoom mics should be on too.
And then second, if we could remove the PowerPoint setting. And we can just. Thank you for your patience. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll move. All of
I would actually like to take a pause. I apologize. It seems that our city attorney can't hear, and I feel like this is a moment at which I'd very much like to have his full ability to participate.
But what's actually the order? We need to.
Yes, so you can it would be a mouthful and it can be a motion, but including all three resolutions.
Nope.
Your question?
Can you go back to the
I'll
mic
take
to see
your
if we're
question.
back?
I can answer that.
Where the specific plan talks about the density for new residential
As
developments. I just wanted to clarify, so in the downtown overlays, it said there was a minimum residential.
Requirements, or are those just,
Would be a requirement to have that minimum density.
okay, so, but this is for new developments. Above an existing storefront, for example, and you're on, I don't know, a quarter of an acre or whatever it ends up being, right? Does that mean that you need to have 5 units there, or can you build a single residence?
That's an interesting question. I think that it would apply.
Mr. Hildebrand, can you hear us?
It's been challenging. So I
But
think
you
we're on a question regarding whether or not the minimum density applies to an existing project.
Yes.
The answer
Yeah, thanks,
is
Russ.
no,
That's-
it's still legal. If there was new development, they would need to meet the new minimum density requirement.
Okay, so we are saying that if you have, let's just say for the sake of argument, a quarter acre storefront on Main Street, and you wanted to build a residential unit above it, you could not build a single family home. You would have to build 5 units, for example.
Again, I think that's an interesting question.
Unless it qualified for an ADU.
Okay, and so you're saying you could potentially build a single family home if you had additional space that qualified for ADUs that would provide extra housing?
Possibly, there are some alternatives, but for the most part, the plan is mandating a minimum density. We want new projects to build out at a higher density.
Okay.
What you're suggesting is exactly what the plan is trying to avoid.
I was back in the day. Okay. I don't know how to make this motion, I think.
Page 16 and 17, and then say,
Okay. All right.
Are you moving all three at the same time? Or one?
Well,
at
I
a
think
time?
I think we had decided to move all three at the same time. If that is not problematic, Russ, do you want to comment?
No. Make your
There were
motion.
just two addendums.
Okay.
It's in different places.
All right. So then I am moving that we adopt a resolution recommending the city council of the city of Bishop certify the environmental impact report and statement of overriding considerations for the downtown Bishop specific plan and mixed use overlay, and adopting the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. And furthermore, we are moving that we adopt the resolution of the planning commission recommending the city council of the city of Bishop adopt the downtown specific plan and mixed use overlay. And furthermore, we are moving that we adopt the resolution of the planning commission recommending the city council of the city of Bishop adopt an ordinance adding chapter 46 mixed use overlay downtown zone to title 17 zoning, adding chapter 47 mixed use overlay zone to title 17 zoning, amending section 17.8.120 definitions motel or hotel, and amending commercial parking standards provided in section 174870A, 175270A, and 175680A of the Bishop Municipal Code. And the addendums I think we identified were the removal of the Hammond parcel, is it? From the overlay.
The specific
From
plan, right? Correct, the mixed use overlay.
It's still in the specific plan, but it's removed from the mixed use overlay, right? Yeah. And the error in the proposition amending chapter 1746 or adding 1746.
Correct.
Removing the automobile uses as conditional uses for the neighborhood transition overlay.
Correct.
And I think that was it, right? Okay. So moved.
Very good. Sounds good.
I'll second that motion.
Ms. Bloom, could we have a vote, please?
Do you want me to read them by title?
Yes, please.
Sorry.
I believe we just did that, so we just need
Are
a
you-
vote.
Commissioner Lothrop,
Yes.
Commissioner Truxillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Lind,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner Gaius,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bakta,
Yes.
and Chair Lowe.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Item number 6, new business. Item A, set Commission. Ms. Kabbalah, could you review?
Yes, good evening again, Madam Chair and Commission. There is an upcoming term expiring on the Planning Commission that has been advertised according for procedure with a deadline for applications scheduled on Friday, December 2nd. As the direction of the City Council to hold interviews for this commission. I'm seeking this evening for your commission to appoint 2 planning commissioners to sit on the interview committee. The potential dates for the interview will be either the week of December 5th through the 9th or the week of December 12th through the 16th. It hasn't been, I don't believe it's been scheduled at this time. And so with that being the case, I'll share with you what happened with the city council last night, which is that they appointed 2 council members to sit on the commission and then 2 substitute council members if the 2 that were primarily selected weren't available. So that is an option available for you this evening. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
What does the interview process look like or entail? It's a panel interview?
It's typically a panel interview, I think the time commitment would be dependent on how many applications are received. And have we received two? One, okay, at this time, with the application period closing on Friday.
Like we did with you in your time,
Is that?
like we did with you on
Yeah.
Zoom, you know?
Yeah.
So you've been through this.
That's true, yes.
I'm available the week of the 12th through the 16th, but not the 5th through the 9th. So let me know if I can be of any assistance.
I would be available, I think, either week. If
Same here, all, both weeks available.
And I am as well. Both of you.
I will go ahead and consider you appointed, or I will ask the chair to appoint you in order then with Herrick, excuse me, with Commissioner Leach and Commissioner Lind being the primary commissioner assistant on the panel, and then Commissioner Bakta and I apologize, who's my second? Oh, thanks. And Commissioner Gaitis as the backup panel, depending on availability. This item does require a vote, please.
And for clarification, if it's 1 or 2 interviews, I can fit it in on the week of the 5th. Do have another appointment at some point, but it sounds like we're flexible during that time.
So noted. Thank you.
And just double checking with Mr. Hildebrand, there are no members of the public in attendance, so I'm not going to take, I'll close public comment, or I won't take public comment on the matter.
You can ask for public comment if there's anyone on
Okay.
Zoom.
Okay.
Raise their virtual hand.
Are there any public comments regarding the appointment of interviewers? for
There are
the-
no public comments on Zoom.
Thank you. Seeing none, I close public comment and I close the item. So we'll call for a motion on the vote.
I'll move that we approve appointing the planning commissioners as stated to the interview panel.
And I'll second. Ms. Bloom, we have a roll call on that vote.
Commissioner Lotharp,
Yes.
Commissioner Truxillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Lind, Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner Gaitis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bakta.
Yeah.
And Chair Lowe.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Item 7, staff and commission reports.
Good evening once more. I don't believe I have any staff updates this evening. Thank you.
Elaine, I saw in the paper this week, yesterday or last week, there's a position over for assistant planning commission or planning director, something like that.
That's correct. The city is currently advertising for an assistant planning position.
So what is your position?
I am currently the associate planner for the city of Bishop.
So you're looking for assistant? Ah, okay. Yes, say that. Okay, all in favor? Say yeah.
See this? She needs help. On that note, are we free to disperse of this at will, or what would you like to do with this? Because it's a lot of paper to put into the landfill.
I appreciate the question. If you don't want to keep it for bedside reading, we would welcome it back at City Hall. The council will be considering this item in December, and if I can make public paper copies available to them or the public, it would be wonderful to do so. Thank you for the question.
It's very similar to the one that we were given in May, correct?
That's
I believe
correct.
I have that at home.
Okay. I adjourn this meeting at 7:55 PM. The next I will be adjourning the meeting once I read this. The next regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission will be December 28th, 2022 at 6 PM in the Bishop City Council Chambers, 301 West Line Street, Bishop. And at 7:55, we are